Today's video tells the mysterious story of a terrible crime that occurred in 1959. The investigation in this case lasted exactly 65 years. Only in mid-November 2024 will the victim's identity be established, and many of the investigators' questions will be answered. In the late 1950s, Mequon, Wisconsin was a quiet and prosperous town. With its well-maintained streets surrounded by dense forests and fields, it felt cozy and safe. Today, Mequon is the most populous city in Ozaukee County. But back then, only 8,000 people lived there peacefully together, and almost everyone knew everyone by name. In this idyllic atmosphere of peace and tranquility, on October 4, 1959, a resident near Davis Road was picking flowers. The only thing that could have disturbed the woman on that warm Sunday afternoon was the looming rain, which might have prevented her from picking a large bouquet of her favorite autumn flowers. But the immediate future looked much bleaker. At one point, the nature lover approached a culvert and saw something she would probably never forget for the rest of her life. In the culvert lay the disfigured remains of a human being. The entire area's police rushed to the scene of the gruesome discovery. It turned out that a head with blonde hair and some other skeletal parts were lying near the drain. In total, in the first 24 hours of the investigation, the police found bones from legs, arms, and parts of the torso. About 1 kilometer further north, they found a partially burned cardboard box that at first glance appeared to contain skin and bone fragments, as well as a cloth bag, work pants, and a Milwaukee newspaper from May 1959. At the end of the day, it started to rain, which the woman who had been picking flowers had feared so much, as she did not yet know what she would soon experience. The bad weather brought the first day of the search to an end. But over the next week, investigators, while searching the topsoil under the pipe, found almost the entire skeleton of the victim. Although all forensic examinations were still pending, Mequon Police Chief Robert Meek, trusting his experience, said, "There is no doubt that this man was murdered." The body had been exposed to very strong environmental influences, so it could not be determined how long the man had been dead. Ozaukee County Medical Examiner Dr. James Walsh examined the body on the day of its discovery and concluded that the victim had been outdoors for 2 to 4 months. Later, this period was extended to 6 months. This aspect was the first mystery of the mysterious case, but by no means the last. Initially, it was determined that the victim was a girl between 6 and 8 years old. However, a more thorough examination later cast doubt on this claim. Charles Wilson, the head of the State Criminal Laboratory, was unable to definitively determine the sex of the discovered remains. The police began questioning residents, and it quickly became clear that a man living nearby had seen a car some months ago from which a child's arm was hanging down. The witness called the police, but they arrived too late. The car with the mysterious cargo had already driven away. This report and the newspaper dated May 1959 gave a very precise idea of the time of the crime. Investigators searched all district records for information on missing persons. It turned out that precisely in May 1959, 6-year-old Nancy Mary Ritchie had disappeared with her mother in neighboring Milwaukee. The girl's father soon after appeared at the state crime lab with a lock of his daughter's hair, but the body could not be identified. Since the police had by then learned from the medical examiner that several healed fractures had been found on the remains, Chief Meek contacted doctors who might have treated Nancy for similar injuries, hoping that X-rays had been preserved that the police could examine. None of the doctors ever came forward. Finally, the girl and her mother were found alive, and everyone rejoiced at this outcome. In this way, however, such a promising lead came to a dead end. In the meantime, a woman from Cincinnati, 750 km from Mequon, contacted the local police station, assuming that the discovered remains belonged to her missing 6-year-old granddaughter, Phyllis Jonf. But this lead also turned out to be false. The regional authorities mobilized all available police forces and the best experts, but could neither solve the case nor identify the victim. Eventually, the body remained in the Madison City Laboratory and was assigned identification number 6426GR. Josephine Breiney was born in 1931. According to the possibilities of the first third of the 20th century, Josephine was the child of 36-year-old Anna Louise, which cannot be said of her then 66-year-old father, Jacob. The man had worked for many years at the Royal Mill. For health reasons, he had to give up his job in 1932 when Josephine was only 1 year old. Less than 7 years later, the head of the family died, and when the girl was 16 years old, she lost her mother. In middle age, Anne Breiney began to struggle with a severe mental illness. Doctors diagnosed her with involutional melancholia, a term describing psychiatric complaints often diagnosed in women during menopause. The symptoms of Anna's condition would today be described as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or depression. In January 1948, she was admitted to Newbury State Hospital, and only 2 weeks later, on February 9, she died, according to hospital records, of exhaustion caused by mental illness. Undoubtedly, her mother's illness and subsequent death had profound effects on Josephine. 4 years later, she became pregnant and on February 26, 1952, gave birth to a son whom she named Chester Alfred Breiney. Of the child's father, it is only known that he could not or would not care for either the mother of his future child or himself. It is not known what the relationship was like between Josephine's several married sisters, the youngest of whom was then 26 years old, and her brother, who was 17 years her senior, but they obviously had no intention of helping the lonely young mother. Finally, the young woman, who had no support whatsoever and was in distress, made a self-sacrificing decision and gave her newborn child up for adoption to a loving family who could offer him a better life. As stated in her obituary, she died in 2000 at the age of 70. The documents tell the story of the child's arrival at the boarding school a little more prosaically. Months after the birth of her son, the Houghton County Probate Court decided that Josephine was unable to care for the child and committed him to the Goodwill Farm Orphanage in the same town of Houghton where the boy was born. The name of the orphanage is no coincidence. Pastor Haljosen founded the orphanage and school for children who had lost their fathers in mining accidents in 1900 on a real farm. It was later replaced by a large brick building near the campus of the Michigan Institute of Technology. At that time, it was one of the few facilities of its kind in the region, which is why practically all locals who wanted to adopt a child turned to Goodwill Farm. This is exactly what happened in our criminal story. William Russell Utila was one of at least 10 children of Michael M. in Finnish and Alida Jutila from Torch Lake Township. William's parents came from Finland to the United States and settled in a region where many people from their home country lived. One day, the boy saw a picture of a young divorced woman from Finland in his aunt's house, and it was something like love at first sight. The aunt organized the couple's correspondence, and so their courtship began. Finally, 26-year-old Hilja Pusker sailed to the United States in May 1950 to meet her future husband. A few days after her arrival in America, she and William married. It was a happy marriage, but one important aspect was missing for the young couple. They both dreamed of having a child. 1.5 years after their marriage, they concluded that it would not be possible for them to have their own child and decided to apply to the Goodwill Farm Orphanage. In November 1952, the orphanage informed William and Hilja that they had a boy named Chester in their care who had been deprived of his parents by court order. The home asked if they would be willing to foster the child. The couple replied that they were willing to do so. Chester moved into their home that same day. The new parents met with their son's birth mother, Josephine Breiney, but only at first. Later, they were no longer interested in these meetings. Chester's official adoption took place 2.5 years after the actual adoption, on March 24, 1955. By this time, he had already received a new Finnish name, Markku Edward Michael Jutila. William and Hilja's native language was Finnish, and they taught it to their son. When Markku started school, he therefore understood little English. In December 1958, life in the Jutila household was hardly carefree. William had been unable to work in the mine for 2 years due to a leg injury. In fact, Hilja was the sole breadwinner for the family. The woman earned money by washing and ironing laundry at home. Shortly before Christmas, William's parents came to visit, but to their surprise, they did not find the family in their house. The perplexed people saw Hilja's laundry hanging on lines. However, it looked as if no one had been in the house for a long time. William's brothers broke into the house and found that the family had obviously left the apartment in a hurry. Food had been left in the kitchen in the middle of preparation. Neither William nor his wife had left a message. They had simply vanished without a trace. Over the years, the large Jutila family knew nothing about their disappeared relatives. 7 years passed in this uncertainty, and then suddenly, at the end of 1965, a letter arrived from William, reporting on their life in a new place and even providing the address of their new home in Chicago. Shortly after receiving this news, William's brothers traveled a short distance further and came to visit him. To their great surprise, the family consisted of only 2 people. Markku was nowhere to be found. The parents explained that the child was being treated in a hospital for mentally handicapped children. This explanation seemed extremely strange to them, as no one close to him had ever noticed anything unusual in the boy's behavior. With heavy hearts, the men returned home. After some time, however, they came again, this time without announcing their intentions. Again, the men asked, where was the child? This time, their younger brother William said that the child was just playing in the neighborhood. As much as the brothers loved William, it was obvious that he was lying to them and something had clearly happened to Markku. Back in Michigan, the relatives contacted the Houghton County Sheriff's Department and reported William's strange behavior. The police officers took the information seriously and sent an entire team consisting of a sergeant, 2 investigators, and most importantly, Deputy Sheriff Francis Heidemann to Chicago. When the law enforcement officers knocked on the door of the Jutila family's house, it turned out that the couple had not expected the visit at all. After the initial questions, the couple began to coordinate their statements with each other in Finnish. They were sure that no one understood them and spoke everything openly, and that was their biggest mistake. Deputy Sheriff Heidemann was of Finnish descent and spoke Finnish as well as the Jutila couple. He told the other officers what he had heard, and William and Hilja's interrogation took a different turn. They were questioned separately, and the inconsistencies in their statements quickly became apparent. It seems surprising, but in all the years that had passed, they had never agreed on the details of a common version. In general, they claimed that their son had come home from school, felt sick, gone to bed, and died. They allegedly panicked because they feared being accused of not seeking medical attention in time, for which they had no money, and also said that they had no money to pay the funeral home. So they decided to dispose of the body themselves without calling official services. Out of fear of punishment, not only did the version of events seem ridiculous, but the details of the alleged events also differed for the couple. As the Chicago Tribune reported, Sergeant William Gorman finally addressed William Jutila and told him that his statement did not match his wife's. William broke down and said, "Markku is no more. Hilja beat him to death." Immediately after William's confession, Sergeant Gorman told Hilja, "Your husband has reconciled with God by confessing to the murder of his son." After these words, the woman cried and then said, "He is dead. We threw him into the culvert." After these confessions, she was naturally taken into custody. In the meantime, investigators set about examining all cases of unidentified bodies found along the couple's route from Houghton to Chicago. Soon they came across the case of a body found by a woman picking flowers in Mequon. However, as successful as they were in taking over the case, the subsequent investigations were unsuccessful. The suspects appeared before the Cook County Circuit Court on March 28, 2 days after their arrest. At the hearing, it turned out that the police had made an error in the paperwork during their arrest, and they had to be released immediately. This procedural error was quickly corrected, and the Jutila couple voluntarily agreed to be extradited to Michigan, where they had previously lived with their son. By this time, however, Hilja had already recanted her confession and insisted on her innocence, which she intended to prove. On April 1, 1966, already in Michigan, Jutila appeared before Houghton County Justice of the Peace Louis G. Becker. At this point, both spouses pleaded not guilty. They were taken into pretrial detention without bail. The couple's lawyers tried unsuccessfully for 3 months to get their clients released on bail. During pretrial detention, the spouses were examined one after another by psychiatrist Ivan Licker. The doctor noted in his report that both spouses were of normal intelligence and showed no signs of insanity or mental illness. Hilja, for example, spoke cheerfully about her adopted son, but only until it came to his death. Then she started to cry. William, for his part, insisted that he and his wife loved their son very much and were only guilty of having thrown the body into a culvert. It took about half a year for all investigations and other activities necessary for the trial to be completed. The first hearings only began in September 1966. Experts who had examined the body found in Mequon police officers who had arrested the couple, and numerous witnesses were summoned to court. It quickly became clear that the prosecution, despite the obviousness of the case, did not have enough evidence to accuse the Jutila couple of first-degree murder. In fact, apart from their own statements, there was nothing connecting them to the murder. The defendant's lawyers, the prosecutor, and the judge met repeatedly to discuss the situation. The fact is that in the mid-1960s, medicine could not determine whether the discovered body even belonged to Marku Jutila. Judge G. Becker took a lot of time to review all the evidence and aspects of the case, and even took several weeks to go through the audio recordings of the defendant's interrogations. In the end, he concluded that the prosecution's arguments were insufficient and granted the defense's motion to dismiss the case in full. William and Hilja Jutila were released. The couple returned to Houghton County, from which they had fled in December 1959, and lived there until their death as if nothing had happened. Hilja died on January 20, 1988 at the age of 63. William passed away only 3 months later on April 23, 1988 at the age of 65 or 66. But as it turned out many years later, this was not the end of the horror story. In 2023, the Criminal Division of the Wisconsin Department of Justice, in cooperation with the Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office and the Madison City Crime Lab, conducted a DNA test on the body found in 1959 and uploaded the resulting profile to the nationwide CODIS database. But no match was found. Since standard DNA tests did not yield results, the material was sent to the well-known Othram lab in the Woodlands. The researchers invested a lot of effort, but in the end it paid off. 65 years after the murder, the body was identified as Chester Alfred Breiney, alias Marku Jutila. The funeral service for Chester Breiney took place on Friday, November 15, 2024, at St. John's Church in Port Washington, Wisconsin. The funeral procession went from the church to St. Mary Cemetery. The costs for Chester's funeral service and burial were borne by residents who were touched by his sad fate. The case of Chester Alfred Breiney was the sixth case in Wisconsin solved with the technology developed by Othram Labs. If you liked the video, please give it a like. That helps a lot with its spread. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video further. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching and take care.